Some men lose everything in a courtroom. Some lose it in a bad business deal. Me? I lost mine in a hospital room at 2:47 in the morning, holding the hand of the only woman I ever truly loved, and making a promise I already knew was going to cost me everything. But I made it anyway, because that's what you do when someone you love is dying. Spectrum Health Butterworth Hospital smells like industrial cleaner and quiet desperation. I know that smell now better than I know my own cologne. I'd been living in the family waiting room on the 4th floor for 11 days straight, surviving on vending machine coffee and the fish sandwiches my buddy Ray kept dropping off from Cottage Bar downtown. The nurses on the ward, good women, tough women, the kind of women who've seen it all, they'd started leaving a pillow and a blanket on the corner chair for me without being asked. Clara was in room 412, 52 years old. Pneumonia that moved faster than anyone expected, hit her kidneys, and then hit everything else. The doctors used careful, measured language with me, rapid progression, multi-organ involvement. We're doing everything we can. What they meant was, say what you need to say. I held her hand every hour I was allowed in. Her fingers were cold in a way that had nothing to do with the room temperature, and I kept rubbing them like I could fix it, like I could friction her back to life if I just tried hard enough. She looked so small in that bed. Clara was never a small woman, not in personality, not in presence. She filled every room she walked into, seeing her reduced to wires and beeping monitors and an oxygen mask fogging up with each shallow breath. I kept thinking, this can't be right. This can't be the last chapter. Garrett, her voice muffled under the mask. I leaned in close. I'm right here, baby, right here. She pulled at the oxygen mask with one weak hand. I looked toward the door. Nurses had told me not to let her remove it, but I didn't stop her. Some rules don't apply in the last hours of a person's life. Terry, she said. Her eyes were clearer than they'd been in days, and that scared me more than the machines. That kind of clarity has a name. Everybody in the family knows it. Nobody says it out loud. I kept my face neutral. He's on his way, Clara. That was mostly true. Terry was in Grand Rapids. Whether he was on his way depended on your definition. Promise me. Her grip tightened around my fingers, surprising me with its strength. Promise me you'll take care of him. Don't leave him behind, Garrett. He needs you whether he knows it or not. I looked at her face, at the 15 years written in the lines around her eyes, the dinner parties at our house on Cascade Road, the Sunday mornings in our kitchen on Fuller Avenue, the way she'd laugh at her own jokes before she even finished them. I thought about Terry. I thought about the $70,000 company truck he drove, the allowance that hit his account every first of the month like clockwork, the 2 college programs he'd ghosted, the factory apprenticeship he'd walked out of after 4 days because, and I quote, it smells like sawdust, and I'm not doing that. The whisper campaign he'd been running for 15 years to Clara's family, Evelyn, Richie, all of them, calling me a blue-collar gold digger who'd latched onto the Vance family name. Terry Vance, who hadn't called his mother in 3 weeks until a nurse phoned him about her condition, and Clara was asking me to promise to take care of him. I looked her dead in the eyes. I promise, I said. I'll make sure he gets exactly what he's got coming to him. Clara smiled. She heard what she needed to hear. I meant every word of it. She passed 4 hours later, just before sunrise. The machines flatlined at 6:19 a.m. on a Thursday. I sat there for a long time before I called anyone. Just me and her and the pale gray light coming through the window. I cried. I'm not going to dress that up. I am 56 years old, and I sat in a hospital chair and I wept like I hadn't since my mother died. Because Clara Pierce was the real thing. She was it for me. I've never regretted loving her, not for a single second. What came next? That's a different story entirely. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Hit that like button. Drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. This story is going to take you somewhere. They buried her on a Tuesday in March at Woodlawn Cemetery on the northeast side of the city. Cold ground, cold sky, about 40 people. I stood at the head of the grave in my good charcoal suit and shook hands and said thank you, and held it together the way you have to hold it together in public. Terry stood across the grave from me in a jacket that cost more than some people's car payments, flanked by Aunt Evelyn Vance Lindell on his left and Uncle Richie Vance on his right. The Vance family triangle. Evelyn had the expression of someone who had been rehearsing this moment for 15 years. Richie kept adjusting his tie and glancing at me sideways, like a man calculating square footage. They didn't look like mourners. They looked like buyers at an estate sale. The reception was at the house on Cascade Road, Clara's house, our house, the house I'd maintained and renovated and paid the property taxes on for 15 years without once putting my name on the deed, because Clara had asked me to wait and I had loved her enough to wait. Neighbors brought food. Somebody had made a proper Detroit-style square pizza from Leo's over on Lake Drive. A woman from Clara's church chapter brought a full pan of baked mostaccioli that nobody touched because grief is weird that way. I stood in my own kitchen eating exactly nothing, running on black coffee and autopilot. The driveway ambush came around 3 in the afternoon. I'd stepped outside for air. February's cold had become March's cold, which in Grand Rapids is essentially the same thing with different light. I was standing next to my truck when I heard the gravel crunch. Terry, Evelyn, Richie. Terry's $70,000 Ram 1500, company vehicle, naturally, was parked right behind mine, gleaming and enormous like a monument to audacity. He had his hands in his pockets and a smile on his face that I can only describe as premature. "We figured now's as good a time as any," he said, without preamble, without a single word about his mother who we'd buried 45 minutes ago. "You've had a good run, Garrett, really. But the free ride's over. Evelyn, the estate and the business both revert to Clara's biological family. We've already spoken to an attorney. Richie, it's nothing personal. It's just the Vance family built that company, and it belongs with the Vance family." He said it like he'd practiced it. He had practiced it. I could tell. I looked at the three of them. 15 years. 15 years of supply chain management and $1.5 million credit lines and lawsuits I personally funded to keep their inheritance from collapsing. 15 years of charging zero rent on manufacturing land that I owned outright. 15 years of being called a gold digger at family dinners by people who hadn't worked a full week in their adult lives. And Clara's body wasn't even cold. Terry jingled his truck keys. Casual, like punctuation. "So," he said, smiling that smile, "what do you say, stepdad?" I looked at them for a long moment. Then I lowered my head, let my shoulders drop, let out a long, slow breath, the kind a defeated man releases. "If that's what you want," I said quietly, "you can have it." Evelyn blinked. Richie looked almost disappointed. He'd been ready for a fight. Terry's smile widened into something that could only be described as triumphant. "Careful, son. You just picked up something you don't know how to carry." I turned and walked back into the house to finish my coffee. The trap was already set. They just didn't know it yet. I was back at my desk at Vance Pierce Design and Furniture Corp. by 7:30 the following Monday morning. The headquarters building sits on Granville Avenue SW, a converted industrial brick structure that Clara had redesigned from the ground up 12 years ago. Exposed ceiling beams, custom walnut reception desk, showroom floor lined with $8,000 dining sets that gleamed under warm gallery lighting. She had an eye for things like that. The building looked like a magazine cover. What it looked like and what it was, that was always my department. I set my coffee down, opened my laptop, and began making a list. Not a revenge list, a maintenance list. There's a difference. Revenge is emotional. Maintenance is just stopping work you were never obligated to be doing in the first place. My phone rang at 8:45. David Fox. David has been my corporate attorney for 9 years. He's the kind of lawyer who irons his dress shirts at midnight and keeps annotated copies of the Michigan Business Corporation Act on his nightstand. He is not a dramatic man by nature. Which is why what happened when he walked into my office 20 minutes later genuinely surprised me. He didn't knock. He walked straight in, dropped a 4-inch stack of files onto my desk with a sound like a gunshot, and stood there with his tie loosened, which for David Fox is the equivalent of a total psychological breakdown. "Tell me," he said, "that you did not agree to hand them the company." I leaned back in my chair. "Good morning, David. Garrett." His voice had dropped to that register attorneys use when they are physically restraining themselves. "You built the operational backbone of this entire business. You own the land under those warehouses. You are the personal guarantor on a $1.5 million credit line. We have options. I can tie these people up in probate court until Terry Vance is collecting Social Security. David, the product liability case alone gives us leverage. David." He stopped. "Draw up the transfer papers," I said. "Full transfer. 100% of the corporate shares to Terry Vance." Dead silence. He stared at me the way a man stares at someone who has just announced they're stepping off a perfectly functional bridge. "You're not grieving yourself into a bad decision," he said slowly. "Tell me that's not what this is." I looked at the framed photo of Clara on the corner of my desk. She was laughing in it. We'd been at the Frederick Meyer Gardens, summer before last, and she'd made some terrible joke about the tulips that I still couldn't remember without smiling. Draw up the papers, I said again. But David, I slid a yellow legal pad across the desk to him. There are 2 clauses I need embedded in the final transfer addendum. Non-negotiable, buried in the standard language where a man who's celebrating won't think to look twice. David picked up the legal pad. He read it. He read it again. And slowly, the look on his face changed from anguish to something else entirely. Something close to professional admiration, with a side of genuine alarm. Garrett. His voice was different now. Quiet. Careful. This is ironclad. I know. When that change of control clause triggers on the credit line, 30 days, I said. Bank calls the full balance. 1.5 million. And the rent. 45,000 a month. Market rate. Effective the moment the ink dries on the transfer. He set the legal pad down, looked at me for a long moment. Does he have any idea what he's actually taking? I picked up my coffee. He thinks he's taking a gold mine. I took a sip. Let's let him think that. David picked up his files, straightened his tie, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and turned back. You know I have to ask. Is this about the promise you made her? I thought about Clara's hand. Cold. The oxygen mask. Her eyes finding mine in that dim room and holding on. Yeah, I said. It is. He nodded once and left. What followed was the quietest 4 weeks of my professional life. Terry and the Vance family circle were under the impression that they had broken me, that the driveway confrontation had cracked some structural beam inside Garrett Pierce and sent him shuffling toward surrender. I know this because Richie Vance, a man constitutionally incapable of subtlety, was spotted having a celebratory dinner at Sanchez Bistro on Monroe Center, with 2 men I recognized as commercial real estate brokers. He was already mentally redeveloping my warehouses. Let him dream. I moved through those 4 weeks methodically, surgically. Each morning I came into the office, did my work, and quietly, carefully removed myself from the infrastructure I had personally built around this company like load-bearing walls. The first wall. I called Mitchell & Crane, the corporate defense firm we'd retained to manage the product liability lawsuit. A nasty piece of work involving a showroom injury claim that had ballooned into a multi-million-dollar civil case. High-end furniture, a negligent installation team, and a plaintiff's attorney from Kalamazoo who was very good at his job. I'd been funding the defense myself, out of my own pocket, for the better part of a year. $60,000–$70,000 in billable hours, already. The defense team was sharp and making progress. I called the senior partner, a man named Todd Weaver, and gave him a simple instruction. As of the date of corporate transfer, your retainer moves to a month-to-month billing arrangement with the company directly. No more personal funding from my side. Pause on the line. And the company is going to be able to sustain those billing rates? I let a beat pass. That's going to be Terry Vance's problem, I said. Another pause. Longer. Understood, Todd said carefully. I hung up. The second wall. I called First Commerce Bank on Ottawa Avenue, specifically the commercial lending officer who managed our credit facility. Woman named Janet Roscoe. 15-year banker, no nonsense. The type who reads loan covenants the way other people read novels. Janet, I said, I need to confirm one thing on our commercial credit agreement. The change of control covenant. Upon transfer of majority ownership, the full balance becomes immediately callable. 30 days. That's still in the current agreement? I heard her pull up the file. Keys clicking. That's correct, Mr. Pierce. Standard clause, change of majority control triggers an automatic review. And if the bank elects to call, 30 days, I said. 30 days, she confirmed. And my personal guarantee. It's released automatically upon the ownership transfer? Longer pause this time. The kind of pause a professional makes when they're realizing something their counterpart clearly already knows. Yes, that's correct. Your personal guarantee is tied to your ownership position. Transfer triggers release. Thank you, Janet. That's all I needed. I hung up and made a note on my legal pad. 1.5 million. 30 days, no personal guarantee remaining. No Garrett Pierce to quietly cover the gap. The third wall. The one that was going to hit them the hardest. I drove out to the manufacturing complex on the southwest side of the city. The Logan Holdings properties. 22 acres of industrial land that I had quietly purchased years ago, pre-marriage, under my private LLC. Clara's company had operated on it for free the entire time. Not a dollar in rent. I'd personally absorbed the property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance. I never once asked for reimbursement. I did it because I loved her and I wanted the company healthy. I walked the perimeter of the main warehouse that Tuesday afternoon. 40-foot ceilings, industrial wood-turning lathes the size of small houses, humidity-controlled lumber storage rooms, 3 CNC routing systems that each cost more than most people's homes, kiln drying chambers, upholstery and fabric inventory, finished goods ready for showroom delivery. You know what it costs to move all of that? I do. I priced it out, actually, just to be thorough. Industrial relocation specialists quoted me between $2.10 and $3.4 million, depending on the destination. That doesn't include permits, infrastructure build-out at a new facility, the 3 to 5 months of production shutdown during the move, or the customer contract penalties during that window. Terry Vance had approximately none of that money. What he had was a company truck and a monthly allowance that was about to evaporate. I went home that evening and called my property manager. Clara and I kept the land ownership private from her family to stop them from trying to leverage it for loans, I told him. The paperwork has always been sitting right there in the corporate vault. Terry's high-priced attorney has the files now. But he's so busy celebrating he hasn't bothered to look up the corporate registration for Logan Holdings, LLC. Trigger the automatic market rate realignment clause. What's market rate running out there right now, he asked. $45,000 a month. Silence. Per month, he confirmed. Per month. And if they don't pay, then we file for commercial eviction, I said, and I padlocked the building. Everything inside becomes subject to lien and seizure under Michigan commercial tenancy law. I could hear him writing. Got it. I'll have the documentation ready. I thanked him and ended the call. $45,000 a month. And he can't leave, and he can't afford to stay. Welcome to the furniture business, Terry. The nights were the hardest part. I want to be honest about that. During the day, I was a machine, calm, precise, operating on pure strategic clarity. But at night, in the house on Cascade Road, with Clara's reading glasses still on the nightstand and her half-finished novel still bookmarked on the kitchen counter, that's when the weight of it all settled in. Was I doing the right thing? I'd sit in the dark and ask myself that question a lot, those 4 weeks. Then I'd remember Terry's face in that driveway, the truck keys jingling. Your free ride is over, old man. His mother wasn't even in the ground yet, and he was already calculating square footage. I'd remember Evelyn at the funeral, scanning the room like an appraiser. I'd remember 15 years of being looked through at Thanksgiving dinners, dismissed at Christmas, and called a gold digger by people who had never built a single thing. And the question would answer itself. I wasn't breaking my promise to Clara. I was the only one who had ever taken it seriously. By the end of April, everything was in place. The transfer documents, all 42 pages of them, complete with David Fox's 2 lethal clauses buried in Section 7, subsection D, in the precise legalistic language that looks like boilerplate until a very good lawyer reads it very carefully. We're ready for the final hearing. I called David the night before. Everything set? I asked. Everything's set. A pause. Trent Blackburn is Terry's attorney, by the way. He's flying in from Detroit. Trent Blackburn. I knew the name. Aggressive probate litigator. Big reputation, bigger invoices. The kind of attorney you hire when you want to make someone bleed in a courtroom. Except there wasn't going to be a fight. That's what Trent Blackburn didn't know yet. There was just going to be a folder sliding across a table, and a man walking out of a room. And 30 days before a bank made a phone call that would change everything. Get some sleep, David, I said. Are you nervous? I looked at Clara's photo in the dark. No, I said, and I meant it. I packed my bag that night, folded my suits, called the moving company I'd hired to handle the house on Cascade Road. I'd already found a quieter place out near Ada Township, east of the city, backing up to the Thornapple River. Good land, peaceful, room enough for a garden, room enough for a memorial tree. I set my alarm, finished my coffee, turned off the light in the office I'd worked in for 15 years. Tomorrow, I was going to give Terry Vance exactly what he asked for. All of it. Every single crushing, beautiful pound of it. If you have been listening for a while, drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button while you're at it, and be sure you're subscribed. There's a moment, and you only get it once in your life if you're lucky, where everything you've quietly built in the dark finally steps into the light. I've been waiting for mine for 4 weeks. Today was the day. The Kent County Courthouse sits on Ottawa Avenue NW, about 12 minutes from the Vance Pierce headquarters building, depending on traffic. I'd driven past it 1,000 times over 22 years without ever needing to go inside. Grand Rapids is a working city. Furniture plants, logistics corridors, craft breweries that took over the old warehouse districts. People here build things. They don't spend a lot of time in courtrooms. I arrived at 8:15, parked my truck in the ramp on Leon Street, sat for a moment with the engine off. This is it, Garrett. No going back from here. Good, I thought back. There's nothing to go back to. I walked in alone. No attorney beside me, no briefcase full of counter-motions. Just me in my best charcoal suit, the same one I'd worn to Clara's funeral, and a single manila folder under my arm. David Fox was waiting in the hallway outside the hearing room. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, which told me he'd read those clauses approximately 40 more times overnight. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Draw me a map to somewhere I'm not sure," I said. He almost smiled. Almost. They arrived at 8:55, which told me everything about how seriously they were taking this. Terry walked in first, wearing a suit I'd never seen before. Charcoal with a faint pinstripe, brand new by the look of it. Bought for the occasion. For his victory lap, he had a fresh haircut. He looked like a man walking into his own coronation. Behind him came Aunt Evelyn in a dark blazer, pearl earrings, the whole performance. She was already scanning the room with the alert energy of someone who'd been rehearsing their winning face. Uncle Richie trailed half a step behind her, hands clasped, nodding at nothing, the human equivalent of a background prop. And then Trent Blackburn. I recognized him from his firm's website, mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of man who carries himself like every room he enters owes him something. He had a leather litigation bag that probably cost more than some people's mortgage payments, and he set it on the table across from mine with a practiced thud, the move of a man who does that for psychological effect. Amateur theater, I thought. But okay. Terry spotted me and smiled. That smile. The one I'd been watching for 15 years, performative, entitled, just a shade past human. He settled into his chair, leaned back like he was getting comfortable on his own couch, and said, "Didn't think you'd actually show up." "Where else would I be?" I said pleasantly. "Thought maybe you'd skip town." He glanced at his relatives. Evelyn let out a sound that was half laugh, half confirmation. "Figured you'd fold. You have no idea how right and how wrong you are simultaneously." "I'm a man of my word, Terry," I said. "Your mother knew that." The smile flickered. Just for a half second. Then it came back. Harder. Trent Blackburn set his reading glasses on his nose and opened his legal pad. "Let's get this done efficiently. Mr. Pierce, my client is prepared to accept the full transfer of corporate shares upon your execution of the final addendum. Once that's complete—" "That's fine," I said. He blinked. He'd prepared for resistance. "That's fine?" "That's fine," I repeated. I opened my manila folder, pulled out the 42-page document, signed the final signature line where David had tabbed it in yellow, and slid the entire folder across the table. The room went quiet in a way that rooms don't go quiet by accident. Terry reached for the folder. Trent Blackburn got there first, professional reflex, and opened it to run his verification review. And that's where the morning changed. I watched Trent Blackburn's face the way you watch a storm front move across Lake Michigan. First the slight furrow, something in the language catching his attention. Then the furrow deepening, his eyes moving back up the page, rereading. Then the stillness. The particular stillness of a man whose brain is moving very fast, while his body goes completely rigid. The color left his face in stages. Like a slow drain, he flipped to the next page, then back, then forward again. There it is, I thought. Section 7. Subsection D. Hello, Trent. Terry leaned over. What? What is it? Trent held up one finger. The universal attorney signal for do not speak right now. Terry ignored it. Trent, what are we looking at? The attorney set the document down very carefully, the way you set down something that might be load-bearing. The transfer is complete, he said slowly. The shares are yours. Terry spread his hands. So we're good. No. Trent removed his glasses. We are not good. He kept his voice low, leaning toward Terry, but the hearing room had the acoustics of a chapel, and I heard every syllable. By accepting these shares, you have legally assumed the full corporate debt ledger. The personal guarantee Garrett Pierce held on the commercial credit line, $1.5 million, has been released, automatically, as of right now. Terry stared at him. So. I could have laughed. So the bank has a change of control covenant in that credit agreement, Trent said, with the restrained urgency of a man defusing a bomb in public. They can call the full balance within 30 days of ownership transfer. $1.5 million, Terry. Payable in full. And Garrett's personal guarantee, the asset backing that bank was relying on, just walked out with him. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Evelyn, what does that mean, called? Trent, it means the bank can demand repayment of the entire credit line. Immediately. Richie, can't we just refinance it, or not without a personal guarantor with comparable assets? Trent said flatly. He was already flipping back through the document, hunting, hoping he'd misread something. He hadn't. David Fox doesn't make those kinds of errors. And that's before we get to the lease. Terry, what lease? The manufacturing property. Trent's voice had gone very quiet. The warehouses. The production facilities. They're not owned by the company, Terry. They're owned by Logan Holdings, LLC. He looked up, which is Garrett's private entity. The sound Terry made wasn't quite a word. Effective today, Trent continued, Logan Holdings is billing the company for commercial rent. Market rate. He found the clause, read the number, set the document down again. $45,000 per month. Absolute silence. Then Evelyn, that can't be legal. It's entirely legal, Trent said. And something in his tone had shifted. The professional aggression was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like reluctant respect. It was always his land. He just never charged rent before. Terry turned and looked at me for the first time since the folder had crossed the table. Really looked at me. And I watched the architecture of what he thought he'd won collapse inside his eyes, replaced by a raw, unadulterated fear. This is a joke, he stammered, his voice losing its shine as he looked at his lawyer. Trent, tear it up. We're reversing the transfer right now. The transfer is fully executed, Terry, I said calmly. Signed, witnessed, and filed with the clerk 10 minutes ago. It's done. There has to be a loophole, Terry barked, turning on Blackburn. Find a way out of it. Trent was already packing his legal pad, slowly. The way a man packs when he's working out his exit from a situation he no longer wants to be associated with. I'll need to review our options. But Terry, he paused, chose his next words carefully. You need to understand that moving the manufacturing equipment alone would cost you north of $2 million. You can't escape the lease by relocating. You don't have the capital. And if you miss a single rent payment, he can evict us, I said helpfully. Padlock the building. Everything inside becomes subject to commercial lien. The inventory, the machinery, all of it. Terry stood up. His chair scraped back hard. You planned this. His voice was tight, rising. This whole thing. You planned this from the beginning. I looked at him steadily. Terry, I said, I gave you everything you asked for. I signed it myself. I didn't fight you in court. I didn't drag your mother's name through probate proceedings. I didn't call in 15 years of favors. I picked up my briefcase. Let you have what you asked for. This is my mother's company. His voice cracked on mother in a way that might have moved me if I hadn't watched him jingle his truck keys 48 hours after her funeral. Your mother's company, I agreed. And you wanted it. So it's yours. The lease is yours. The lawsuit is yours. I buttoned my jacket. The bank call in 30 days. That's yours too. What lawsuit? Evelyn said sharply. Nobody had told her about the lawsuit. I looked at Trent. He looked at his legal pad. He didn't answer. Oh, this was a good day. There's a product liability case, I said pleasantly. Showroom injury. The plaintiff's attorney is very motivated. I've been personally funding the defense team for about a year. I tilted my head. I won't be doing that anymore. Richie made a sound like air leaving a tire. I picked up my folder, straightened my tie, and looked at the three of them. Terry with his fists at his sides, Evelyn gripping the table edge, Richie already unconsciously stepping backward toward the door like a man calculating distance to an exit. 15 years. Every condescending smile at Christmas dinner. Every passive-aggressive comment about Clara's business and Clara's legacy and what exactly it was that Garrett Pierce brought to the table. Every whispered insinuation to Terry that I was nothing but a blue-collar opportunist riding a widow's coattails. I thought about all of it, and I felt nothing. Not triumph, not anger. Just a vast, clean, quiet peace, the kind that comes when something that's been weighing on you for a very long time finally gets set down. Take care of yourselves, I said, and I walked out. I didn't look back. That's important. I didn't look back once. The dominoes fell exactly the way the math said they would. The morning after the hearing, First Commerce Bank officially triggered the change of control clause and issued a 30-day demand note for the full $1.5 million balance. To protect their capital, they placed an immediate administrative freeze on any outward corporate spending. When Friday arrived, Terry couldn't clear payroll. The 80 master craftsmen, who had zero loyalty to a kid who treated manual labor like dirt, walked off the floor immediately, leaving half-finished walnut dining tables sitting dead on the assembly lines. With the factory dark, luxury orders for showrooms in Chicago and Detroit went unfilled, triggering massive non-delivery penalties. By week 4, Terry defaulted on the $45,000 rent to Logan Holdings LLC, and the bank stepped in to begin formal foreclosure proceedings on what was left of the corporate name. The product liability lawsuit landed its judgment in early June. The plaintiff's attorney, unburdened by the competent defense team I'd funded, moved through Terry's unprepared replacement counsel like a freight train. The judgment came in at $2.3 million. Terry didn't have $2.3 million. He didn't have $45,000 for the second month's rent either. I had the commercial eviction notice served on a Wednesday morning. My property manager padlocked the warehouse doors by Thursday afternoon. The industrial machinery, the lathes, the kilns, the CNC systems, the entire inventory of finished furniture, became subject to creditor lien. The bank took the showrooms. The lawsuit plaintiffs went after Terry's personal assets. His truck, the $70,000 company-paid Ram 1500, the one he'd been jingling the keys to in my driveway, got repossessed on a Tuesday in June. I heard about that secondhand, and I won't pretend I didn't feel a small, sharp satisfaction about it. Evelyn Vance Lindell, who had spent 15 years as the psychological architect of Terry's entitlement, stopped returning his calls somewhere around week 7. Richie Vance, who had been mentally redesigning my warehouses over dinner at Sanchez Bistro, was last reported attempting to re-enter commercial real estate in the Traverse City market. I heard they weren't speaking to each other anymore. Funny how the appetite for a feast disappears when there's nothing left on the table. But the Vance family never understood that a company isn't just a name on a building or a credit line at a bank. The true soul of that business was the 80 master craftsmen who spent their lives working the timber. When Terry defaulted on the rent, my landlord lien took legal priority over the machinery. I executed a quiet foreclosure sale, buying back the lathes, the kilns, and the tooling for a fraction of their value to satisfy the debt, locking the bank and the lawsuit plaintiffs out of the factory floor. I didn't let those 80 men pay for Terry's arrogance. I quietly rehired every single one of them under a new entity, Pierce Fine Woodworking LLC. They went back to work in the exact same facility, using the exact same tools, but this time they were backed by a personal fortune that would never let them down. I planted the maple tree in the backyard of the property near Ada Township on a Saturday morning in late June. The Thornapple River ran quiet behind the tree line, and the light came through the heavy leaves the way it only does in midsummer, gold and green and patient. I stood there for a long time with my hands in my jacket pockets looking at that young tree. Clara loved maples. She used to say they were the most honest trees. They show you exactly what season it is. I looked up at the sky, the kind of blue that doesn't apologize for itself. "I'm sorry, Clara." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I know this wasn't the kind of promise you expected me to keep when you asked me to take care of him." I paused. The river moved. A woodpecker worked somewhere in the tree line. I tried to teach him. I offered him a seat right next to me for 15 years. Showed him the supply chains, the credit structures, the land portfolio, all of it. He didn't want a seat. He wanted to stand on my neck instead. I crouched down, pressed my palm flat against the base of the young tree. The bark was rough and cool and real. I realized somewhere along the way that I couldn't save a boy who'd decided he didn't need saving. I stood. So I gave him exactly what he asked for, Clara. Every last piece of it. I just let him find out exactly what it takes to carry it. The wind moved through the maple. I don't know what I expected. Some sign, some absolution, some cinematic moment where the universe confirms you did the right thing. That's not how it works. That's not how any of it works. What I got was quieter than that. Just the river, the light, the smell of Michigan spring, and the particular piece of a man who kept his word, paid his debts, and walked away from a burning building he didn't set on fire. I went inside and made coffee, sat at the kitchen table by the window, and for the first time in 4 months, I wasn't tired. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. I will see you on the next one.